But we do welcome as a special guest this Theological Thursday, Geoff Macpherson from Grace Theological College. Well, good morning, Geoff. Let's talk about sacrifices.
Good morning. Yeah, let's talk about sacrifices. What do you want to know?
Well, why? Why are sacrifices required to please God in the first place?
Yeah, as I said to you earlier, it was the same question that surfaced at the dinner table as we were trying to read a bit of Leviticus around dinner, and it's
Bit of light reading.
I was going to say, mate, you were asking for trouble with that one.
yeah, wee bit off-putting off your meal too, but so the question is, why does God, require these sacrifices? Because we read about animals, we read about grain offerings, we read about oil, we read about libations of wine, and they're very closely stipulated, and regulated. And we're told that, the smoke from these offerings is an appeasing fragrance to Yahweh. And it's really interesting because I've also been rereading Homer's Odyssey, and so this is all about Odysseus, who's basically battling the Greek gods and goddesses, and it you read about if he's going to do a voyage or going to do something dangerous, he has to do a sacrifice, because especially a voyage, because Poseidon is out to get him and so on and so on. I'd love to retell the story, but so. The question is God kind of like these Greek and Roman gods who are maybe vindictive, holding personal grudges, and they're just waiting to smite you. And so you've got to get them on your good side before you do anything. I would say no. When you read the Old Testament, for believers in the Old Testament, the sacrifices were a constant reminder of God's holiness and humanity's sinfulness. So it was really powerful, it was very symbolic, and it was very much in your face that God is a holy God, and our sin is so bad and our guilt is so significant that it has to be dealt with. Thus the tabernacle, thus the temple, thus the Levitical priesthood, and the whole sacrificial system that points to a need for a mediator between humanity and God.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest differences between archaic literature like, Homer's Odyssey and what you see in the Bible is the fact that God is forever forgiving. Even when the Jews and the Israelites get it wrong, they don't do the sacrifices, they turn their back on God time and time again. He doesn't actually give them retribution, but he actually forgives them and turns his face towards them time and time again. And in light of Jesus and that ultimate plan that they didn't necessarily know about back then, like God always had that plan in mind, and you think, wow, what a gracious God. But I guess it does ask the question of, how do we look at sacrifices in this day and age with Jesus as the Lamb?
Yeah. So with the Old Testament, sacrifices, one of the really fascinating things is, of course, they were very much stipulated and regulated, but that the people were never really measuring up. Like they weren't ever going to get it perfect. But God he doesn't actually ever criticize them for not getting it perfect, but what he does criticize them for is their heart. And so, you read in Isaiah, he's like, hey, stop bringing me these vain offerings and these abominations of incense because your hearts are far from me.
Yeah.
And so he's actually interested in the heart attitude, not in them getting it all accurate and perfect. And you're right, it points forward to the New Testament. It points forward to that once for all sacrifice, the Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I think too, I've been meditating on this a little bit before our discussion today too, and realizing that there is a sense of you can't have one without the other. And you kind of alluded to it already, that there is something in us as well that wants justice. Like we look out in the world and we see there being pain and people taking advantage of others, murders, all these sorts of things. And we say, well, we don't want that. That is a bad thing. And so, well, if you believe that there must be justice, then there must also be consequence somehow for that kind of behavior. And then we have our own scale of what really should be a bad thing and what shouldn't. Like, hey, I'm still a good person. I've never murdered anybody. And yet we're up against a scale where we have a perfect God whose sin is just, it's an anathema. You cannot have the two in the same person. And so in some ways, there must be some sort of mechanism. If you want to believe in a thing like justice and a God who is holy, then there would therefore have to be some kind of mechanism of dealing with consequences of sin, which in this case, he tried to come up with, in some ways, the most practical example he could that we would understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It's often when I'm trying to explain this to people, I talk about the holiness of God and the sinfulness of humanity, and as you say, we often compare ourselves to each other to justify ourselves.
Yeah.
But God is absolutely holy. He is purer eyes than but to behold sin. And so it's really a reminder, a really powerful reminder to us of that separation that occurs because of the fall.
Yeah, very hard to calibrate north when so many of us are off track, right?
The whole idea, you might say the imagery or the principle or the teaching behind sacrifice is brought really strongly into the New Testament. And it's applied in two main ways. The first way is that Jesus, he is our priest and our sacrifice. So, his atoning death on the cross, he acts as both the high priest, and you read the book of Hebrews about that. And he offers the once for all sacrifice, unlike all the other sacrifices, and his death entirely pays for our sin. And here's the thing I love to remind Christians about. He's still your high priest. Jesus is still continues forever to be our high priest and to intercede for us right now.
I love that. So he's negotiating on our behalf, which is amazing, right? He walked on this earth as a human, fully divine, knows every challenge that we go through, can see our position from that light, but then can also see it from being completely holy and realizing how far away from holiness we are. So it's an interesting one. So let's talk about sacrifices, because I know that the Bible talks about a sacrifice of praise. So even if we're not, burning lambs on an altar anymore, which we aren't in this day and age because Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice, we're still called to actually lay down our lives, right? As Christ laid his life down.
Yeah, well, so here's the thing too. So just as Jesus is a priest and a sacrifice, we are holy priests. It says that in 1 Peter, we're a holy priesthood, and it says we offer spiritual sacrifices. And hopefully all of our listeners know Romans 12:1, which is to present your bodies as living sacrifices. So we are priests and we offer living sacrifices to God. And even when you read in the Paul's epistles about becoming godly and living a holy life, and there's that language around putting to death. The old Puritans used to talk about the mortification of sin.
Right.
Think of Mortine fly spray, but putting to death sin in our lives, and turning, laying down our lives for others and turning to Christ and living for him is the whole principle of sacrifice.
Yeah. And in fact, I sometimes think too about these principles that when we read them in the Bible, we can make them sound this highly abstract kind of thing. But when it comes to sacrifice, here's an idea I'll run past both of you. It can sound like this really big deal, but you think about, say, when you meet that special somebody that you're going to live the rest of your life with, you immediately recognize that if you're going to have a relationship with this person, you can't just do everything for yourself anymore. But the beautiful thing is, when you love this person, it's not a burden. You're like, hey, I'm going to do this thing for this person. I'm going to spend my money on them. I'm going to spend my time on them. That is, by all measure, a sacrifice, but it's a sacrifice of love that you are happy to do. And I think that's kind of the reminder I like to give myself. When the Bible asks about sacrifice, it's not like paying a toll or paying like a life tax to God that says, if you're going to be my friend, you have to do this thing. It's more, if you really know what I've done for you, what kind of a response does it prompt? And hopefully it would be something where you would joyfully lay down what you want on behalf of this other person.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. So it's something that we live for. It's the transformed Christian life, you might say. God, he indwells us. The Holy Spirit indwells us and makes us able. The fruit of the Spirit, the old life that's put away, the new life that we put on. It talks about putting on Christ. All of these incredibly strong pictures, and so, as you say, it's a delight. It's something that we have it's a privilege and it's a joy to our spirits.
And I think too, as a parent, like you really understand that, laying your life down, because all of a sudden your life is about somebody else or other people. But the thing is, it's the lens that we approach our life, right? The lens through Christ. It changes the way we see things, and it changes each decision that we make. Well, thank you so much, Geoff, for joining us today to unpack an interesting topic in the Lenten season. Why are sacrifices required to please God, and how do we apply this principle in the New Testament?
Hey, we really hope you enjoyed that video.
Make sure you like and subscribe and turn your notifications on.
And I hope you enjoy the next one.
Yeah, we'll catch you then.